All right, let's get into it.
I plugged the mic in, flipped a couple switches and started rhyming. It wasn't right then, but I kept writing, knowing I had to put the time in to earn my stipend. Do your guy a solid one time, subscribe and like this.
So I could have swore analog summing was all just essentially snake oil, right? Because you take in one piece of just any old mixer, right? And then you putting it in a rack and you selling it for more than what it costs to buy a mixer. Right? That's charlatanism, right? And so I never even bothered messing around with summing mixers, though. You know how when you keep hearing something and you keep hearing something, the whole propaganda effect, you just be like, all right, well, maybe it is something to it, right? Well, I done had some maybe there is something to it moments with summing mixers about a dozen or more times since they started becoming a thing, right? Because each time one come out and they say they Transformers do this and they some bus do that and da 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 this and that and they be bright colors and be different knobs on them and oh these channels can go mono, right? It's all bullshit though, ain't it? Right? So look, I wouldn't even be sitting here talking to y'all about this right now if I hadn't tried some shit. So remember I was telling y'all that I was going to try to use the 16 rig as a mixer for routing duties, right? To solve some routing issues I was having, not to kind of improve my sound or whatever cuz as far as I was concerned, I had my sound kind of dialed in as of what like a couple months ago or whatever, right? As far as the external gear and coming in and out of the box and whatever, right? On a humbug one day, I wasn't doing nothing. I was like, let me go up here and see what this is about. And so I took 4 stereo pairs and sent them ADAT out from the studio to the 16 rig, right? And I already had the 16 rigs monitor outs going through my master chain. And so as soon as I sent the ADAT outs into it and clicked to monitor those inputs, right, in the software, everything just went out the monitor outputs into the master chain. And almost ain't even want to tell y'all, I heard a shift in the stereo image. And what I started doing with panning while I was sending the stereo buses out like that was very much more apparent in the stereo field. And I had my mother over, somebody who does isn't into the technical side of these things, and had her close her eyes and say point to where the voice is coming from. And she said, pointed dead center, and I said, open your eyes. And she opened her eyes and was shocked that it wasn't no speaker where she was pointing at. Right? I don't know what it is yet. I haven't done enough listening for real, and don't get your hopes up. I'm not finna go in and do no null tests and get a bunch of files for y'all to listen and download and all that. All that's bullshit because there's too many variables, right? First and foremost, me running those signals out digital like that and sending it directly through my master chain, the gain structure was totally different. It didn't even sound right until I got stuff like adjusted to the right levels and then all of a sudden just bow. You know what I'm saying? And so it might not be the summing. It's probably a combination of all these different things that I didn't set up like one piece at a time. But this got me all in my head about summing mixers all over again, right? Because on the one hand, I'm using ADAT outs from the studio to go to the 16 rig. That means the 16 rig still has 8 analog inputs. 16 analog inputs. I'm using some of them. So the way I got it set up, right, is the analog ins and outs 1 through 8 on the 16 rig I've left open for whatever developments may come here in the near future, right, with this whole summing thing. And then inputs 9 through 16, whatever I'm needing to send through that chain, I just plug them in there. I send a couple synthesizers through there, here and there, whatever, right? But the fact that I have 8 analog inputs and 8 analog outputs that are free, you know what I'm saying? Like totally separate from these stems that I'm sending in to be summed in the 16 rig, means that I can get analog processors and plug them to those ins and outs, and that sum can go through whatever I wanted to. So obviously my first mind was to get one of them colorful summing mixers, an 8-channel joint, and send it out. But I got to thinking, like, what the hell is the point of that? I already have all of the routing flexibility that a summing mixer affords me. I could just go straight to compressors, EQs, or hell, I could buy different flavors of that transformer box from my homeboy out there on the West Coast. You see what I'm saying? Like, stereo image be damned, because I already knew how to figure out how to get a great Phantom Center, but look, this got me down this whole rabbit hole all over again. And there's one thing that I haven't mentioned yet, that for some reason I haven't heard from nobody that's been singing the praises of outboard summing for all these years. That seems, at least in my mind, the biggest benefit to what I'm actually doing, to like actually making records. Because it's one thing to be able to get sounds in the studio and be like, oh wow, look, when you plug this one, it sounds better than when you plug that one. But when you start making records, that shit don't mean shit. You know what I'm saying? All they talk about, that extra 5%, none of that means nothing when you're making a record. Flat out, period. Challenge me on it. You know what I'm saying? What does make a huge difference, though, is summing those signals out like that and having it go through my master chain. And remember, I told you I put the external sidechain EQ on that compressor, right? I noticed that without drastically altering the overall vibe and tonality of the mix, I can flatten the shit out that bitch. It took me a day or two to realize what had happened, right? Because I did a mix out that way, and then I opened it up in the mastering suite and I went to master it. And when I turned the limiter up, I was able, by the time I started to hear it was like caught fucking something up, you know how they do when you turn it too far, right? The signal was already so damn flat that the needle that tells me the dynamic range was in the past, right? I had trouble getting mixes loud enough. Like I couldn't get them flat enough without changing how it sounded so drastically that I just didn't like it no more. So I would leave my mixes with a lot more dynamic range than what that type of song these days would typically call for. And I would be a little bit lower than all of my peers' mixes. But in the long run, I would like the way my stuff sounds better. When I ran it through there with the low frequencies like pulled out on the EQ to where it was really pretty much ignoring everything below like 150 to a degree, I had it kind of sloping. And I gave it some, you know what I'm saying, I pulled the threshold down some. It's backwards on the TL audio. That's why I'm turning the wrong direction. I pulled the threshold down and I didn't start hearing it crush. You know what I'm saying? Until the needle was really just, you know what I'm saying? And so I backed it off a lot. I backed it off until I really liked the way it sounded, right? And I was like, cool, I'm kind of used to that sound. And I didn't realize that where I usually stop in the mixing stage as far as compressing the mix, you know what I'm saying, to get that level, where I usually stop at, you know what I'm saying, where it sound good to me, I hadn't realized I had gone way further with the hardware because it didn't break up. So the mix didn't fall apart like it usually does when I'm using my plug-in compressors. And so when I got to the mastering stage, I was able to move the signal way up or what, like I could have made it way louder than I did this last mix that I did. And I saw where I was at and I was like, oh well, I don't even need it to be that loud. You know what I'm saying? And I had more headroom to go before the mix started to fall apart. And that is, in my mind, like, I'm gonna explore it more, but that's probably the biggest benefit I've seen to this outboard mix chain that I've kind of stumbled into out of all of this shit. You know what I'm saying? That's the one thing that I've stumbled across so far that I'm like, damn, I don't know if I could get that in the box.